How could they do that? Asked Nat. Don't ask me. You know how stories get around. Will you join my shooting match? No, I'll get along home. The wife will be worried else. My missus says if you could eat gull, there'd be some sense in it, said Trigg. We'd have roast gull, baked gull, and pickle 'em into the bargain. You wait until I get a few barrels into the brutes. That'll scare 'em. Have you boarded your windows? Asked Nat. No, a lot of nonsense. They like to scare you on the wireless. I've had more to do today than to go around boarding up my windows. I'd board them now if I were you. Darn, you're windy. Like to come to our place to sleep? No, thanks all the same. All right, see you in the morning. Give you a gull breakfast. The farmer grinned and turned his car to the farm entrance. Nat hurried on, past the little wood, past the old barn, and then across the stile to the remaining field. As he jumped the stile, he heard the whir of wings. A black-backed gull dived down at him from the sky, missed, swerved in flight, and rose to dive again. In a moment it was joined by others, 6, 7, a dozen, black-backed and herring mixed. Nat dropped his hoe. The hoe was useless. Covering his head with his arms, he ran toward the cottage. They kept coming at him from the air, silent save for the beating wings. The terrible fluttering wings. He could feel the blood on his hands, his wrists, his neck. Each stab of a swooping beak tore his flesh. If only he could keep them from his eyes. Nothing else mattered. He must keep them from his eyes. They had not learned yet how to cling to a shoulder, how to rip clothing, how to dive in mass upon the head, upon the body. But with each dive, with each attack, they became bolder. And they had no thought for themselves. When they dived low and missed, they crashed, bruised and broken on the ground. As Nat ran, he stumbled, kicking their spent bodies in front of them. He found the door. He hammered upon it with his bleeding hands. Because of the boarded windows, no light shone. Everything was dark. "Let me in," he shouted. "It's Nat, let me in." He shouted loud to make himself heard above the whir of the gull's wings. Then he saw the gannet, poised for the dive, above him in the sky. The gulls circled, retired, soared, one after another, against the wind. Only the gannet remained. One single gannet above him in the sky. The wings folded suddenly to its body. It dropped like a stone. Nat screamed, and the door opened. He stumbled across the threshold, and his wife threw her weight against the door. They heard the thud of the gannet as it fell. His wife dressed his wounds. They were not deep. The back of his hands had suffered most, and his wrists. Had he not worn a cap, they would have reached his head. As to the gannet could have split his skull. The children were crying, of course. They had seen the blood on their father's hands. "It's all right now," he told them. "I'm not hurt. Just a few scratches. You play with Johnny, Jill. Mammy will wash these cuts." He half shut the door to the scullery so that they could not see. His wife was ashen. She began running water from the sink. "I saw them overhead," she whispered. "They began collecting just as Jill ran in with Mr. Trigg. I shut the door fast and it jammed. That's why I couldn't open it at once when you came." "Thank God they waited for me," he said. "Jill would have fallen at once. One bird alone would have done it." Furtively, so as not to alarm the children, they whispered together as she bandaged his hands and the back of his neck. "They're flying inland," he said. "Thousands of them. Rooks, crows, all the bigger birds. I saw them from the bus stop. They're making for the towns." "But what can they do, Nat?" "They'll attack. Go for everyone out in the streets. Then they'll try the windows, the chimneys." "Why don't the authorities do something? Why don't they get the army, get machine guns, anything?" "There's been no time. Nobody's prepared. We'll hear what they have to say on the 6 o'clock news." Nat went back into the kitchen, followed by his wife. Johnny was playing quietly on the floor. Only Jill looked nervous. "I can hear the birds," she said. "Listen, Dad." Nat listened. Muffled sounds came from the windows, from the door. Wings brushing the surface, sliding, scraping, seeking a way of entry. The sound of many bodies pressed together, shuffling on the sills. Now and again came a thud, a crash as some bird dived and fell. Some of them will kill themselves that way, he thought, but not enough. Never enough. All right, he said aloud. I've got boards over the windows, Jill. The birds can't get in. He went and examined all the windows. His work had been thorough. Every gap was closed. He would make extra certain, however. He found wedges, pieces of old tin, strips of wood and metal, and fastened them at the sides to reinforce the boards. His hammering helped to deafen the sound of the birds, the shuffling, the tapping, and more ominous, he did not want his wife or the children to hear it, the splinter of cracked glass. Turn on the wireless, he said. Let's have the wireless. This would drown the sound also. He went upstairs to the bedrooms and reinforced the windows there. Now he could hear the birds on the roof, the scraping of claws, a sliding, jostling sound. He decided they must sleep in the kitchen, keep up the fire, bring down the mattresses, and lay them out on the floor. He was afraid of the bedroom chimneys. The boards he had placed at the chimney bases might give way. In the kitchen, they would be safe because of the fire. He would have to make a joke of it, pretend to the children they were playing at camp. If the worst happened and the birds forced an entry down the bedroom chimneys, it would be hours, days perhaps, before they could break down the doors. The birds would be imprisoned in the bedrooms. They could do no harm there. Crowded together, they would stifle and die. He began to bring the mattresses downstairs. At the sight of them, his wife's eyes widened in apprehension. She thought the birds had already broken in upstairs. All right, he said cheerfully. We'll all sleep together in the kitchen tonight. More cozy here by the fire. Then we shan't be worried by those silly old birds tapping at the windows. He made the children help him rearrange the furniture, and he took the precaution of moving the dresser, with his wife's help, across the window. It fitted well. It was an added safeguard. The mattresses could now be laid one beside the other against the wall where the dresser had stood. We're safe enough now, he thought. We're snug and tight, like an air raid shelter. We can hold out. It's just the food that worries me. Food and the coal for the fire. We've enough for 2 or 3 days, not more. By that time, no use thinking ahead as far as that. And they'd be giving directions on the wireless. People would be told what to do. And now in the midst of many problems, he realized that it was dance music only, coming over the air. Not children's hour as it should have been. He glanced at the dial. Yes, they were on the home service all right. Dance records. He switched to the light program. He knew the reason. The usual programs had been abandoned. This only happened at exceptional times, elections and such. He tried to remember if it had happened in the war, during the heavy raids on London. But of course, the BBC was not stationed in London during the war. The programs were broadcast from other temporary quarters. We're better off here, he thought. We're better off here in the kitchen, with the windows and the doors boarded, than they are up in the towns. Thank God we're not in the towns. At 6 o'clock, the record ceased. The time signal was given. No matter if it scared the children, he must hear the news. There was a pause after the pips. Then the announcer spoke. His voice was solemn, grave, quite different from midday. This is London, he said. A national emergency was proclaimed at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Measures are being taken to safeguard the lives and property of the population. But it must be understood that these are not easy to effect immediately, owing to the unforeseen and unparalleled nature of the present crisis. Every householder must take precautions to his own building, and where several people live together, as in flats and apartments, they must unite to do the utmost they can to prevent entry. It is absolutely imperative that every individual stay indoors tonight, and that no one at all remain on the streets or roads or anywhere outdoors. The birds in vast numbers are attacking anyone on sight, and have already begun an assault upon buildings. But these, with due care, should be impenetrable. The population is asked to remain calm and not to panic. Owing to the exceptional nature of the emergency, there will be no further transmission from any broadcasting station until 7 a.m. tomorrow. They played the national anthem. Nothing more happened. Nat switched off the set. He looked at his wife. She stared back at him. "What's it mean?" said Jill. Trick-or-treaters.